Welcome to East Asia Pulse, a podcast series by the East Asian Institute at the National University of Singapore. I am Dr. Peng, Principal Research Fellow at the East Asian Institute, and I'll be your host for today. We will be looking at the issue of how South Korea has been navigating geopolitical dynamics and pursuing multilateralism amid the US-China rivalry in today's episode. For this discussion, we are delighted to have a special guest with us, Professor Shin-wha from the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Korea University, who is now a visiting fellow with the East Asian Institute. Shin-wha was also South Korea's ambassador for international cooperation on North Korean human rights. Her research focuses on East Asian multilateral security, US multilateral policies, UN security roles, global peacekeeping, and human security. Welcome, Shin-wha, and thank you very much for talking to us. Shin-wha, you are the first female professor at the College of Political Science and Economics at Korea University. This is impressive indeed. You are a role model for many smart and younger Korean women to become scholars. Can you share with our audience why you decided to become a political scientist and a scholar of international relations?
Thank you, Peng, and thank you for having me here. And let me take this opportunity to thank all EAI, the fellows and friends who just gave me such a wonderful hospitality during my short academic visit. So go back to your question. I can offer you very typical answers that anybody can give you. I've been always interested in history and society and the global affairs. And also in growing up in South Korea, I witnessed and also to some extent I was a part of a South Korean democratization protest and movement that eventually bring us a earlier democracy in Korea. So those things naturally drove me to politics and leadership. But if you can ask me for deep insight, my path into academia was also act of, I call, rebellion. My parents, who was such a deeply loving and supportive persons, but they were very traditionally conservative in a way, inspired by Confucius culture, right? Mm. So while they sent my brother abroad to study, they encouraged me to attend a prestigious women's university majoring in English language and literature. That made me a very suitable position to get a right man. They said, you are a smart woman, so you should meet smarter men, right? So then make the marry and happily ever after. That scenario, they love it. But when I was ready to pursue my graduate school, they, of course, insisted I should marry first, and that was my breaking point. So determining to prove myself, I left almost in, I would say, defiance. So once I made that decision or choice, I felt a tremendous responsibility for myself to succeed. Not just to justify my decision, but to truly establish myself in academia. I had my PhD, right? And worked in different places like Maryland, Columbia, Harvard, and Sweden, Uppsala, and Norway Peace Research Institute, and the United Nations, to name a few. And I also had an opportunity to work in the field, including Sudan refugee camp. All those things afterwards, I think at that time it was rare for women to build such a career in international relations in academia. And I faced multiple rejection, not too surprised, partly because I was a woman. But ironically, I should confess that being one of the few also helped me gain recognition faster. The world obviously has its own strange sense of fairness, I would say.
Thank you so much for sharing with us your fascinating story on how and why you became a scholar. That's really wonderful. Can you please explain the term multilateralism in East Asia and the world? What does that mean?
Okay. Multilateralism, we don't know whether that is a principle, process, or just a terminology. Those things we really need some kind of consensus over it. But probably try to making a consensus out of it will be a sort of a waste of time. But in essence, multilateralism is I would say, process, where 3+ countries work together based on a shared or common thread, principles, norms, and rules, you can just name it, rather than pursuing narrow and transactional interests of individual sovereign state. So I think it ensures long-term stability by institutionalizing the rule of law or cooperation among states that will make our cooperation more predictable and resilient. And also maybe we can build up something out of it, what I call institutional entity. I think that happened at the global level at least. Multilateral institutions like UN, WTO, and loose format, but still having a very influential like a network or process is G7 and G20. Those have played a key role in fostering stability and reducing uncertainty, and they also even facilitate collective problem solving on the global stage. And that will definitely, according to John Ruggie or Stephen Krasner, those the classical scholars who are working on liberal internationalists, say they can lower transaction cost and making sustained cooperation and etc. But in this region, however, in Asia, East Asia in particular, I think multilateralism operates somewhat differently. It is often less institutionalized, and we are depending more on consensus building, particularly ASEAN countries, and non-binding agreements. And those mechanisms like ASEAN and ASEAN Plus 3 is, I would say, a bit informal and diversified, depending on which country we are talking about. And I think that reflects the region's emphasis on sovereignty and historical animosity or sensitivities, and the balancing act between major powers. It's very something to do with what we can call realism has paid attention to, mainly because of probably China's growing influence in this region. So unlike Western multilateralism that tend to be rule-based and institutionalized, I would say Asian or East Asian multilateralism or multilateralism is now in the Pacific as well, right? Prioritizes flexibility and pragmatism. As for the future of multilateralism, particularly with Trump's comeback, we've already seen how leadership shifts impact multilateralism. So during Trump's first term, we all observed he openly rejected traditional multilateralism and favoring unilateral and transactional diplomacy. So I think his first attendance at APEC in his first term, I remember he just promoted American first policy, but ironically, Xi Jinping positioned his country as the defender of global multilateralism, invoking concepts like a global community with shared destiny. So I think that was U.S. had long championed since the end of the World War II, but while Trump gave up or threw it out, Xi Jinping just picked it up and then just advocating at that time. Looking ahead, I want to add one more kind of the multilateralism, what I call hybrid multilateralism. By that, I said a dual approach that combines institutional framework on one hand and unilateral partnership on the other hand, while also engaging not just like-minded aligned allies or partners getting together, but we have to engage with and also persuade non-aligned and swing state, because we don't have to having everything consensus, right? But still, as far as those non-aligned swing states share the practical interest or universal values together with what we call like-minded countries, I think we should be together. So particularly next 4 years will be tough for multilateral cooperation with Trump in power. But still, in order to adjust ourselves to this geopolitical landscape, both global and regional level, I think it is crucial for us to sustain rule-based order in this increasingly fragmented world. For that, I think hybrid multilateralism will be one of the nice approach we should seriously think about.
I note that South Korea is a member of the G20, ASEAN Plus 3, ASEAN Regional Forum, East Asian Summit, ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC. So my question is this: is South Korea a quintessential middle power that pursues multilateralism? Why is South Korea pursuing a multilateral strategy regionally and globally?
Thank you very much to call South Korea as a quintessential middle power. Actually, the Yoon government they try to promote for GPS, global pivotal state, or together with Canada and Australia, we try to call us for advanced the middle power and whatsoever. Having said that, I think we have some kind of main objectives to become advanced or quintessential middle power. First is ensuring national security. That is very much becoming the center of the middle power. I think that will benefit our own national interest. That's facing North Korea's particular nuclear threat or other kind of military provocations. And also we are surrounded by 4 major powers, right? So geopolitically, I don't think we are that well situated. But still, South Korea relies on multilateral security framework, as you mentioned, ASEAN Pro 3, ARF, APEC, and everything, G7, G20. I think that is, for the crisis management and diplomatic leverage to balance great power libraries. The second is securing economic stability. We are resource-scarce country, so export-driven economy is our backbone for the economic development. That means we are very vulnerable to any types of the trade or economic or financial disruption, as you see the chaotic situation for us in 1997 and to some extent 2008 global economic crisis. So South Korea engaging in G20, as you said, and APEC and multilateral trade agreements to protect supply chains and market access. So we are a bit nervous now because Trump 2.0, he didn't yet talk about what he's going to do with East Asia yet, right? But we have to be prepared for whatever direction he's going. And then third is managing regional relations, of course. So given its complex history with Japan, particularly bilaterally, multilateral platform will be a good leverage or structural avenue for cooperation, if not bilaterally, but trilaterally and so on, enabling practical engagement. And the fourth is expanding diplomatic influence on the global stage. Unlike great powers that set rules, we relatively smaller state had no choice but to follow them, right? But still, we would like to use multilateralism to the leverage to shape the regional norms in line with our own interest. So institutions like ADMM Plus and its G7 outreach role strengthen, I do believe, our influence or position as a bridge between advanced economies and emerging market, if not also least developed countries.
Shin-wha, I'm curious, when did South Korea launch its multilateral strategy? When did it begin? Was it during the Cold War or was it really a post-Cold War strategy?
Good question. I would say from right before the end of Cold War.
So it was before
because what I'm saying,
post-Cold War era.
That's my argument. The reason is because when President Yoon came to power in the wake of illegitimate military coup, he was desperately looking for legitimacies and also why he needed a reason for him to in power. So not only the focusing on the economic development, he would like to have a more blessing from the international community. And one effort was try to host the 1988 Seoul Olympic Games. His old friend, who turned out to be the next president of the South Korea, that is No Tae-woo, he went everywhere. That was called the Nordic policy.
Okay, so there's a domestic dimension to South
Somehow
Korea's multilateral
to,
strategy.
I think so,
which leads to the next question. What are the main characteristics of South Korean multilateral strategy in the post-Cold War era? That's the image that South Korea is a shrimp, a prawn among whales in East Asia. So I don't know whether it's a stereotype or not. Presumably, the two whales are the United States and China today. Personally, I think that South Korea has developed so well that it's no longer a prawn but a dolphin. So it's a dolphin among whales. What are the key challenges for South Korean multilateralism amid competing great powers? Okay, after all, South Korea is a middle power, right? So how does South Korea balance its multilateral strategy between the United States and Chinese whales? The US is the key security partner, while China is the key economic partner. So how does South Korea pursue multilateralism between the US and Chinese whales?
Well, speaking of the shrimp and dolphin, we said from helpless shrimp to smart dolphin. But pragmatism, diversification, and adaptability, I think that is the key for our multilateral strategies. like economic multilateralism. South Korea secures its our export-driven economy through trade supply chain initiatives. WTO, G20, and APEC can be our nice platform. And second, regional security cooperation. So while Korea-US alliance remains central, the Seoul expand its security network through ASEAN +3 and East Asian Summit and so on. So we would like to show some flexibility beyond the traditional alliance. And third is middle power diplomacy we mentioned earlier, so that we strengthen cooperation with different part of the world, like ASEAN, EU, Indo-Pacific partners. Of course, we have challenges, however, whether on one hand, strategic ambiguity, on the other hand, strategic clarity. What I'm saying is how to navigate between US-China rivalry is always a big challenge to us. On one hand, strategic ambiguity means more common under progressive administration. This approach balances US security ties with strong economic dependency or engagement with China. But critics often argue that it risks being too accommodating to Beijing and prioritize inter-Korean engagement over broader strategic concern. But on the other hand, strategic clarity that is typically favored by conservative governments, which is now, this approach strengthens alignment with the US on security and supply chain. So while reinforcing national security, it also faces criticism for over-reliance on Washington and sidelining economic ties with Beijing. I would say as a smart dolphin among whales, South Korea must carefully balance strategic flexibility and multilateral engagement to safeguard our security, economic, and diplomatic autonomy, because maintaining a rule-based multilateral strategy will be the best interest for Korean people and Korean governments to navigating great power competition and ensuring mid- and long-term stability.
The Republic of South Korea has a regional doctrine known as the New Southern Policy towards the 10 ASEAN member states, forged by the then Moon Jae-in presidency. Its successor, the current Yoon Suk-yeol administration, rebranded and upgraded the New Southern Policy into KASI, Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative. So my question is, how does South Korea's KASI fit into its overarching multilateral strategy? And how do South Korea and the ASEAN member states navigate together in the choppy waters caused by the US-China rivalry? In other words, a pot of dolphins are also swimming with the anchovies, amid the two whales. So how does South Korea cooperate with the 10 ASEAN member states? How do we go about amid the changes in regional and global politics?
Well, I have to give my gratitude to you to bring my attention to this subject, because under the progressive Moon Jae-in government, and initially they tried to have two different policies. It's a new northern policy and a new southern policy. But after the breakdown of Hanoi summit between US and North Korea became very hostile against South Korea. Despite all those gracious and also like a nice suggestion and proposal by Moon Jae-in governments toward Pyongyang, they just flatly rejected and blamed South Korea. So that he had no choice but to only focusing on new southern policy called in Korean Shin-Nambang policy. So I'm very familiar with it. But about the KASI you mentioned, that is a Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, right, under Yoon government. Shame on me, although I'm a professor of international relations, it's very unfamiliar to me. So that thank for you to have my attention to that direction. So anyway, speaking of those KASI, I think that obviously built on the new southern policy from the previous government. I think that's a good thing. At least we have some consistent foreign policies despite their difference of ideology and also the regime difference, right? But still, as the US and China tension is furthermore increasing, KASI, I would believe, helps Seoul diversity, economic and technological cooperation, and reducing over-dependence on any single power, either US nor the China. But Trump's comeback, however, give a big challenges, at least there are two key takeaways stand out. First is strengthening regional frameworks are very important now. So enhancing ASEAN-led mechanism allow for a more unified and resilient response to economic and security challenges that requires a more greater regional stability. And second, expanding what I call functional cooperation, prioritizing collaboration in areas like digital innovation, hardware infrastructure, climate change, humanitarian assistance, and those foster tangible benefit while avoiding any political sensitive issues. But I want to draw attention to the fact that the East Asian Community initiatives,
East Asian community
back in 2000, right? That is once a key regional vision has been somewhat overshadowed by the Indo-Pacific strategies.
Yes,
So now, speaking of CASI, I would like to remind you and others of spirit of East Asia Vision Group that eventually built up East Asian Community, EAC. So now is the time, I think, to revisit and revitalizing East Asia's own regional strategy, balancing it with the Indo-Pacific dynamic, while ensuring that our East Asian perspectives and cooperation remain central in navigating today's complex and uncertain global order, and also while South Korea and Japan appears to pay more attention to the Indo-Pacific over the past few years.
Shin-wha, you explained to us very well the concept of multilateralism, and then you went on to explain South Korea's multilateral strategy, and then you explained South Korea's multilateralism and its cooperation with the ASEAN 10. I would like to ask you to explain to us another concept which is, of course, related to multilateralism. And the concept is mini-lateralism, between bilateralism and multilateralism. May I ask, in your opinion, is mini-lateralism more practical and doable than unwieldy multilateralism when there are so many actors pursuing their conflicting national interests? My question is, how does South Korea pursue mini-lateralism? In fact, many countries pursue mini-lateralism, whether you are big powers, middle powers, or even small powers. And specifically, is the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat comprising South Korea, China, and Japan a good example of minilateralism?
When I'm talking about minilateralism or Korean ASEAN, I want to highlighting for bilateralism is also very important.
Yes,
That should be the
sure.
backbone. So speaking of that, I would like to have one word on Korea, Singapore. You know all those political mess taking place in South Korea now, right? So despite those potential political shifts in South
Yes.
Korea, I have to tell you that ASEAN remains a priority, right, in a way, but in particular Singapore. So President Yoon had a state visit in October last year.
Yes.
Both nations agreed to upgrade our interstate ties to a so-called strategic partnership in 2025 because we are marking now 50 years of diplomatic relations. So this long-term commitment underscores the enduring importance of Korea-ASEAN cooperation regardless of the leadership change. So I believe no matter who will become a new president in South Korea in the later part of this year, I think the Singaporean Prime Minister will visit Seoul and they will build up the strategic partnership. I think that is wonderful news. Minilateralism appears to be a fashion, not only in this region but in the globally. Particularly in the Biden administration tried to promote lattice-like
Yes.
cooperation, right? Depending on what issue you are talking about. So minilateralism, I don't think we have agreed upon definition yet, just like multilateralism. But once again, I'm not sure whether we really need it, right? So we have to have some kind of a consensus over concept is good, but though we were not able to do it, I think we can still give a try to how we can make a constructive minilateralism both at the regional and global level. So minilateralism involves, as you know, small group cooperation focused on specific issues, offering greater flexibility, resilience, and even efficiency compared to broader multilateralism that tend to emphasize inclusivity and institutional legitimacy. Look what happened to ALF. That has a great attention because that's where even North Korea was part of it. But now, having had many member state countries there, they are often criticized for they are too permissive. So that not much efficient, right?
You see, when we talk about unilateralism, many people think about South Korea, United States, and Japan,
Right.
especially after Camp David. But there's something which is under the radar and very interesting, which is TCS. What is your view about
that one?
TCS, the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat? So despite the differences in terms of regime types, the differences between China, South Korea, and Japan, and of course between South Korea and Japan, you have perennial, historical, and territorial issues. Whether you call it a dispute or an issue, matter of interpretation, and between China and South Korea, you have other issues. Do you see that there's space for closer cooperation between the three in areas of economics, culture, ecology, climate change, and so on and so forth?
As you mentioned, Korea, Japan, and China tripartite secretariat is located in Seoul. Remember, I just mentioned earlier, we really need to go back to the spirit of East Asian Vision Group or East Asian Summit meetings in 20 plus years ago. So I think that tripartite secretariat among China, Japan, and Korea still have it. So I think we need to emphasizing that as well. But go back to that Camp David summit things. I do believe Korea, Japan, and U.S. trilateral cooperation is very important for the sake of South Korea's security and economic purposes. And that's called it Camp David Summit, right? And Biden's already out, and Kishida was already a long way out, and Yoon probably is about to go as well, so that no actors remain. But still, it's not individual leaders' business, right? That's a state business. For that, if Trump didn't like what Biden named Camp David, we can rebranding. We can rebrand Mar-a-Lago Summit or whatsoever. But still, I think we have taken that spirit and objectives and content so that we can move on for that. And then that's good for not only functional purposes, but also for the strategic purposes in the longer run. But I do believe as long as we can present so-called strategic value added to Trump's MAGA, Make America Great Again policies, I think Trump will buy it because he is very practical and transactional diplomacy advocating person.
How I wish we, instead of just MAGA, we have MEGA, no? MEAGA, Make East Asia Great Again. So that's a variation of an East Asian community, first propounded by then President Kim Dae-jung, and that seems such a long time ago. My next question is rather tantalizing, if not cheeky. I heard that South Korea was on the verge of joining the G7, coming of age. Means first the G20 and then G7. Is this a rumor or a fact? What is the story about South Korea and its abortive G7 bid? What can South Korea do as a member of G7 if it becomes a G7 in future?
Okay.
This is, of course, very hypothetical, so I don't really know. It's a rumor to me, but perhaps you know much more than my audience and I. Can you share with us about South Korea becoming a G7?
To begin with, I once again would like to thank you. Call it on the verge of. I think as a Korean, I might be a bit more careful about it because it's our hopeful foreign policy objectives. But as a matter of fact, with the invitation to summit in 2021 and 2023, that reflecting our growing economic and geopolitical role. There are discussion about potential inclusion in the G7 has been a good subject for a while. But particularly in 2024, efforts to expand the G7 to G9, including Korea and Australia. By the way, this idea began with the Trump 1.0, where Trump was talking about G10, G11, where he tried to bring Russia back.
So G9, who is the other one?
Russia and India.
Including Russia.
That was Trump's idea. But
but that's even after Crimea. Crimea was swallowed by Russia in 2014.
Well, even after his invasion of Ukraine, now the Trump tried to talk with Putin over Zelensky, right? So he can say anything, but I don't know he meant it at that time. But he just said it at that time. So I think that was ironically was the beginning of talking about G7 plus. But having said that, U.S. Center for Strategic International Studies (CSIS) they were kind of champion for Korea should be one of it to strengthen democratic alliance. And Canada is a strong supporter as well of South Korea's membership because as America, they will host this year's G7 summit, presenting a key opportunity for South Korea to push the initiative forward. So we've been working hard last year for that, including myself. But there are obstacles because you need a unanimous consent. And Japan has expressed reservation, and their rationale is concern include the potential impact on group cohesion and South Korea's foreign policy shift depending on the leadership, particularly regarding
Hey,
China.
to say that Japan has reservation, I think it's an understatement, So
No. Well, there are some European having a little bit of reservation, but not as strong as the Japan one. But again, I want to be careful about the Japan's position because I cannot speak for them. But that complicate further is our own fault. South Korea's domestic instability escalated in December 3rd, 2024, when President Yoon declared martial law and leading to impeachment and suspension from office. And all those things raised concern about political stability and democratic governance of South Korea, and further weakening, unfortunately, our G7 bid. And furthermore, Trump's re-election in the U.S. introduced uncertainty regarding multilateral alliance in general and value-based diplomacy and shifting the focus away from G7 expansion. So I don't know where we are going, but hopefully the time comes again for us to push forward for it.
I understand. Next question. Again, this question is potentially sensitive. Can South Korea pursue a successful multilateral strategy abroad if there's severe domestic political polarization and a vacuum in its top political leadership after Yoon's botched martial law declaration? Where do we go from here?
Well, I already briefly touched upon
Yes.
the domestic politics as a hurdle to our grand strategy of foreign policies, right? But in the good news, South Korea has long demonstrated resilience in the face of crisis. Like rising from the ashes of the 1950 Korean War, we achieved both rapid economic development and democratization within just 25 years. Also, during the 1997 financial crisis, I don't know whether you heard about the gold collecting campaign in Korea. That is, the country displayed remarkable national unity, put all those small and big chunk of the gold, try to help the Korean finance situation. So I think that showcased the South Korea's adaptability and influence. Of course, but its ability to maintain a consistent and effective multilateralism strategy is now in question due to domestic political turmoil and very deep political polarization and a leadership vacuum following Yoon's impeachment process over his failed martial law attempt. Still, how domestic chaos undermine multilateral diplomacy? First, loss of global standing, because of political instability, of course, undermine international confidence. Second is foreign policy becomes partisan. As I mentioned earlier, unlike major democracies where democracy remain very partisan, South Korea's political faction attack each other on foreign soil, damaging national unity. Third, missed strategic opportunities. Internal distraction risk derailing initiative like what I said, G7 expansion, Indo-Pacific cooperation, and even ties with ASEAN, I would say. So history repeats itself. I can give you one anecdote. President Yoon impeachment comes at a moment when U.S. foreign policy is shifting under Trump 2.0, leaving Seoul without strong leadership at a critical time. That happened in 2017. President Park Geun-hye impeached left South Korea adrift just as Trump's first term began. So you know what? Park Geun-hye was talking with President-elect Trump, talking about all the issues. And then by the time Trump came to power, Park was impeached. And Yoon was talking with President-elect Trump, a particular on the shipbuilding industry corporation. By the time that Trump came to power again, Yoon is now on the verge of the impeachment. So that's the irony. So South Korea has overcome, however, far greater challenges or crises through national unity, resilience, and strong civil society. So just as we did in the past, I hope our mature civic and intellectual community can help stabilize the current political turmoil sooner or later.
My last question is about North Korea. Are multilateral frameworks potentially useful for informal bilateral North-South dialogue? Even if this approach may not appear realistic or promising today, but we have to think long-term. No? Because North Korea and South Korea, both are members of the United Nations. They're also members of the ASEAN Regional Forum, and also this second track known as CISCAP. So do you see that multilateralism can provide a platform down the line where both North and South at an opportune moment can actually talk to each other? Better to jaw than to war.
Answer is yes. Because
Okay, the answer is yes. Why?
Because multilateral framework can serve as at least indirect, still valuable platform for informal North Korea-South dialogue, although even in the informal setting, North Korea usually these days refuse to talk with us. But still, by listening to what they are talking in an international fora, we can get some idea, right? Multilateralism can somehow then facilitate engagement. First, track 1.5 and track 2 diplomacy, although CISCAP and NICED, that is in the University of San Diego, Susan Shirk made, those academic exchanges and think tank dialogues and informal meetings involving retired officers and academians like us can create, I would say, back channel opportunities. The second is ASEAN and regional security forums. Singapore and other ASEANs are very valuable platform for us, right? So platform like here, ALF and others, although I'm a little bit critical of ALF's inefficiency because they are too big, but still, North Korea is a participant, although they haven't participated there for a while. Allow for indirect engagement without committing to direct talks. And then third is a humanitarian and functional cooperation. So non-political initiatives in areas like health, climate change, and disaster relief provide lower risk entry point for engagement. Of course, but there are big challenges. That is, effectiveness of all these sort of the approaches entirely depend on whether North Korea is willing to engage. They are the actor to decide whether come or not. Pyongyang uses multilateral forums very selectively, often participating only when it sees strategic or economic benefit. So additionally, external pressures like sanctions or geopolitical tension can lead North Korea to disengage entirely. And now they have very close military ties with Russia, and then to some extent having those economic ties with China. I think they are in a better position and they are utilized or they take advantage over geopolitical complexity of the contemporary world. I have a little suspicious about the effectiveness of this kind of multilateral platform, at least for now. But still, in principle, and I think at the end of the day, this multilateralism is a very useful platform for us to engage with North Korea. Having said that, my final word, multilateralism cannot replace direct negotiations. Not only with North Korea, but with any other state, right? But it presents alternative diplomatic political channels for informal exchanges and trust building. And whether this approach works depends on whether Pyongyang views participation as beneficial, something that remains highly uncertain. But still, I think we keep trying. I think that is the only option we have for now.
Sure, I think we have time to squeeze in one last question during our precious studio time. And you have explained to us very well multilateralism and unilateralism. Now, I'm going to ask you about bilateralism, but with South Korea as a bystander in this particular issue, which I'll explain. So in the case of Trump, we know his approach, Trump 2.0, is transactional, unilateral, and unpredictable. But for Trump to hold another summit with Kim Jong-un, that is maybe a known unknown, is not totally unpredictable. The question is when, what, how, where. Off the cuff, what is your gut feeling if you were to hear in 2025 or 2026, there'll be another Trump-Kim summit, say in Singapore or in a place. Given Trump's good relations with Putin, he announced to the whole world, we are going to have a Trump-Kim summit in Vladivostok. How would you respond?
I have to tell you that you should remember why US and North Korea had a summit meeting.
Yeah.
Their objective was very clear at the time, denuclearization of North Korea. Although North Korea tried to say denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, having said that, they tried to make sure US wouldn't extend the nuclear deterrence, right? But anyway, clear objective is only one thing, denuclearization. And although Trump would say, well, I like to get along with the nuclear power North Korea, I think he didn't mean it, right? He just depict the fact. That's what they already said.
Yes.
So that at least until now, U.S. official position about it is denuclearization of North Korea. That's clear, right? So that I think they should, no matter whether they will meet with the North Korean leader, I think hopefully Trump should abide by that principle.
Yes.
Otherwise, if he's just meeting with him, not for denuclearization, but for arms reduction. And that naturally bypassed the South Korea's engagement with that talk, right? That definitely will be the cross the South Korea's security red line. So I think we, including myself, we have to be very clear about that positions in the first place. And speaking of the possibility of Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un, I would say if they are going to meeting in the near future, that might not something to do with the denuclearization alone, but probably as Trump is now very desperate end the Ukraine war, though you have to think about what you're going to do with that 10,000 plus North Korean troops who are attached to those battlefield. Dealing with that issue, how we can make an exit for those North Korea's military involvement in this war, may be a good entry point for Trump is approaching to the North Korea. But remember, Kim Jong-un and the North Korea is far different from the first summits because they are now the more nuclearly armed state with a big confidence. And then number two, they have Russia and China together. They can utilizing their leverage, right? And then third, probably most importantly, Kim Jong-un wouldn't ever forget for that embarrassment he got from Hanoi summit. Because he went all the way from Pyongyang to Hanoi by train, right? And then he just went back from there to North Korea. So I'm sure his embarrassment and frustration and anger are still there. So unless Trump gave him very tangible present that pleased him, I wouldn't think he will re-engage with Trump in the near future. But in the case of the Trump, they said he would love to receive the Nobel Peace Laureate, either negotiating with Ukraine and Gaza, but that is very complicated. So maybe he's tempting to do something with Kim Jong-un. That might be the easier ticket for him to get to Nobel Peace Laureate. So it remains to be seen.
With that, I would like to thank you, Shin-wha, for joining us. Once again, I'm Lam Peng, and you have been listening to East Asia Pulse. To learn more about our work and stay connected, you can subscribe to our mailing list on our website or follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Thanks for listening to us. Goodbye.